Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. We're going to talk about Strixhaven and college and baristas, and we're going to talk about the right way to roleplay with DM James. And we're going to talk about DM James' wrong opinions on Strixhaven and college, and on college specifically. All right, so first of all, let's talk about DM James, because this is essentially a response to his video. And it is a response that was requested. That's an important part. So let's talk about this. So one, I listened to The Right Way to Roleplay with DM James. I disagree with him, I would say 95% of the time, okay? So, and the reason why is the category he's in, right? So, in my opinion, the FRPG, the fantasy role-playing game, the TTFRPG, the tabletop fantasy role-playing game industry, cuts into three worlds: D&D Now, 5e, Dungeon Masters, D&D Then, D&D 1e, 2e, 3e, 4e, right? Dungeon Masters, D&D Not, people who play copies of D&D 1e and 2e. And DM James is a D&D Not game master. He runs, at this point, his main jam is Adventure or Conquer a King, which is a copy of D&D 1e, in my opinion. And that's his primary game. He talks about it the most. It's his main jam, right? Which I stand against. I think D&D Now should, if you care about Gary Gygax, if you care about TTFRPG world, you stay on the Now, right? Because it's the most relevant, right? So DM James comes on and he talks about this thing that's been bouncing around the internet, which is they made an adventure, which is Strixhaven Starbucks, right? Totally legit. Say that this adventure, it's a free adventure. I don't know why, and like the D&D Thens and the D&D Nots just could not help themselves. They were slavering over it like they're just like Pavlov's dog, like drool just coming out of their mouths, like to castigate this and say, oh, this is terrible, and anybody who plays this is a loser, right? And DM James literally says that. He's like, anybody who plays, uses D&D to play going to college and being a barista is a loser, right? Like, wow, okay. Now, first of all, I gotta love that, right? And the reason why is, I totally think he's wrong, and I don't think it's right to call people losers, right? But one thing I do like is I like when your opinion is strong, right? If you got some milquetoast, middle-of-the-road opinion, keep it to yourself. Who wants to hear a video about that, right? Like, or if you're agreeing with a million other people, who cares, right? Like, you got to bring something new, right? Like, and fresh and powerful, right? And so he gets this, right? If you're going to open your mouth, say something interesting, right? Like, and he does. And so I appreciate his strong opinion stated, right? But he did something I think everybody needs to be doing, including me, right? And I try to do this, but I think he did it better here, like, than I've done it on some of my past videos. He just spouts all this nonsense about, like, what he feels about Strixhaven and college, and he's shockingly wrong, right? But at the end, he's like, well, that's what I think, but what am I missing? He literally says, call me nuts. Tell me what I'm missing, right? And he's like, hey, this is what I think. What part am I not understanding, right? Now, first of all, DM James, you're not nuts. I don't think you're crazy at all. And I don't think anybody should be calling anybody crazy. I'm a little sensitive to that one, because, like, I'm not crazy, but I get that in my comments. People are like, oh, you're nuts. Like, it's said like once a month, right? It's hurtful. And so, one, I don't question your sanity at all. I also don't question in any way your intelligence, right? But I think your opinions on Strixhaven, college, and spending time in college. By the way, I would love to get to the barista part. I didn't even have time in this video for it. We're just going to talk about him saying, if you're spending, using D&D to go back to college, you're a loser, right? Like, he says it right in the video. The link's below. You'll see it, right? I'm not making this up. He says it, right? So here's why he's wrong. Okay. So one, I think thank you for inviting response to this, right? And for being willing to hear others' response. It's not a small thing. There's so much vehemence out there. And so this is the pattern. State your opinion exactly like DM James is doing. State your opinion boldly, right? Put your name on it, say it with conviction, and then be willing to listen, right? And that's what DM James is doing. I really appreciate that about his channel. right? So I appreciate the opportunity for me to comment on your content, and here we go. So one, I think the reason why you're shockingly wrong is your opinion is coming from a position of privilege, okay? And zero empathy, right? Okay, so let's get into it. Here's why using D&D to go back to college, right, is very important for many people, and why you don't get it, DM James. This is the part you're missing, okay? So first of all, I'm assuming you went to college, right? Please correct me if I'm wrong. Here's why I assume that. Number one, your vocabulary. You use vocabulary of a college person. Two, all right, the fact that you play Dungeons and Dragons. I'm increasingly convinced 51% level, the macro level, all D&D players, all at the macro level, Dungeons and Dragons players have at least 1 degree, and I think most have 2 or 3 degrees. I have 2. I have a bachelor's in political science, and I have a master's in an MBA in technology management, right? So like I have 2 degrees, right? And I think you have a degree, at least 1 degree, right? And I think you went to college, and I think you were like, college was nice, right? You know, and you're older, and you're thinking back on your college days. You might have paid for your degree, or somebody else paid for yours, right? My dad paid for my degree, my first bachelor's degree. I paid for my second degree, right? And the reality is, I can tell you right now, like I got my degree in 1988, and I got another one in 2005, okay? And the 1988 one, my entire education cost less than 1 year for any of my kids. I have 2 who've already gone through college, 1 going into college now. My entire education costs less than 1 year of their college 4-year degrees, right? Like, so one, I think you're thinking about a time where college degrees were a lot more accessible, right? And so one of the reasons why people might want to go back to college, right, is one, not everybody can even go, right? They're outrageously expensive now, and not every probably had the privilege like you to have a cheap degree, or somebody pay for it, right? Like, so I think you're coming from a perspective of privilege, right? And you are taking your degree for granted, right? Like, you are literally like, oh, of course I deserve a degree. But nowadays, you know, when people have to put out $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 for the same degree I got, well, you know, forget them. They can go kick rocks. Who cares, right? And there are people who don't got $200,000, $300,000 to go get a degree, right? And they're going to use Strixhaven to go and get what you already got, right? Like, and why shouldn't they be able to do that, right? Just because they're not as privileged as you? It's outrageously selfish and zero empathy, right? Like, the other thing is, there are people, I know quite a few of them, who went, there's one in particular, I know this person who went to college, broke up with a boyfriend, drops out of college, and never went back, right? Just so she wouldn't have to, like, be in the space of that other person, right? I can tell you right now, her life is not going great. Like, it did not, like, there's no structure of her life where she's like, oh, you know, it was a great idea not to get to my degree, right? Like, she was super intelligent, and now she's doing work that people that have college degrees should not be doing. And there's nothing, like, intelligently she could handle it, but emotionally she wasn't able, right? There's literally low millions, I would say maybe 10 to 30 million people in America who went to college and bounced out, right? So going to college in Strixhaven may give them the courage to go back, or it can give them the experience, the super dope dormitory college experience, right? Here's another one. There are millions of people who go to college and have to commute, right? And then their college days look just like their high school days, right? And I was really blessed. I went to Millersville University. I stayed in a dormitory for 4 years, ate whatever I wanted, talked with whoever I wanted, did art whenever I wanted, went and saw the swans in the pond, right? And that's just a regular college, right? Like, that's not even a magical college the way Strixhaven can, you know, bloom out all these structures, right? So so people who can't go to college, people who went to college and dropped out, right? Because one of many different reasons, right? People who go to college but had these sucky, shriveled, like desiccated experiences compared to people who went and could go to parties and, I worked on the the news. I worked on the newspaper and, did all these extracurriculars, right? And all that stuff. Played sport. Here's the other one. I couldn't play sports at Millersville University. I just, I was a wrestler in high school, but I couldn't get onto the football team. But in Strixhaven, I can be on the Mage Tower team, right? Like, so that's what you're missing, DM James, right? You're coming from this incredibly privileged position, right? You're not empathizing with people who don't have your privileges, right? And you're saying, I don't care if they get what I already got, right? It's wrong. It's selfish. It's zero empathy. It's outrageously wrong. That's my opinion, DM James. Thank you for inviting my opinion. I appreciate it, right? And of course, I'm ready to hear whatever anybody has to say on this topic, on what DM James said or on what I said, because DM James has set a really good model. Say your opinion strongly. Make it exciting, right? Say something of importance and magnitude. And then shut your mouth and listen, right? Like that. And that's what I'm going to do now. I'm ready to hear what you guys have to say. And, on what DM James had to say. Link is for his video is below. And my opinion on it. All that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing. Have a wonderful millennium.